I never expected that a ridiculously dramatic thunderstorm would change my life, but that's exactly what happened. That's how life works sometimes, isn't it? You settle into a rhythm, a comfortable, predictable loop of work, home, and maybe one small, brave thing you do for yourself each week. For me, that one thing was a Tuesday night bowling league. It was my single scheduled injection of social interaction in a life that had become profoundly quiet. My name is Lucas, and at 26, my world was mostly contained within the walls of my small, one-bedroom apartment and the hushed aisles of the university library where I worked as an archivist. I loved my job. I loved the smell of old paper, the satisfying click of a deacidified document being placed in its folder, the quiet order of it all. But order can be a close cousin to loneliness, and my apartment, as much as I loved its quiet calm, often felt less like a sanctuary and more like a waiting room for a life that hadn't quite started. The bowling league was an attempt to nudge that life along. I wasn't good at bowling, not by a long shot. My form was terrible, my scores were mediocre on a good day, and I spent most of my time just trying not to drop the ball on my own foot. But it got me out of the house. It put me in a room with other people, with laughter and the crash of pins and the smell of stale beer and cheap pizza. It was noise, and for a few hours a week, noise was exactly what I needed. And then there was Caleb. Caleb was our team captain. He was the kind of person who seemed to have been built in a lab to be effortlessly charming. He was tall, with broad shoulders that were put to excellent use, sending a bowling ball down the lane with a graceful power I could only dream of. He had dark, messy hair that always looked perfect, and a smile that seemed to start in his eyes and spread across his entire face. He was encouraging, a natural leader, shouting praise when someone got a spare, offering a fist bump after a gutter ball. To me, he was like a figure from a different world. He moved with a confidence that I had only ever read about in books. He was friendly with everyone, including me, but I always felt like an awkward satellite in his orbit. He'd clap me on the shoulder and say, "Nice try, Lucas. You'll get it next time," and my entire nervous system would short-circuit. I cataloged his every glance, his every laugh, filing them away in the archives of my own hopeless crush. He was, in my mind, impossibly, certainly, 100% straight. He talked about sports, he drank beer with the other guys on the team. He had a kind of easy, casual masculinity that felt leagues away from my own quiet, indoor existence. So, I kept my distance, content to just watch. It was safer that way. Observation was my specialty, after all. I could appreciate him from afar, like a rare manuscript I wasn't allowed to touch. That night, the game ran late. We'd actually made it to the league semifinals, a minor miracle fueled almost entirely by Caleb's skill. The air in the bowling alley was thick with the energy of a surprise victory. We celebrated with another pitcher of beer, and for once, I felt genuinely a part of it all. I let myself relax, laughing at Caleb's retelling of the final, winning frame. By the time we all started to pack up, the world outside had changed. A low rumble had been vibrating through the building for the last hour, but now it was a full-throated roar. Someone opened the main door, and a sheet of rain, so dense it looked solid, slammed against the glass. The wind howled, and the sky was split open by a flash of lightning that bleached the parking lot in a stark, momentary white. The storm had arrived, and it was furious. My apartment was only a 10-minute walk away, a fact I was immensely grateful for. I zipped up my jacket, preparing to make a run for it. People were grumbling, pulling up ride-sharing apps on their phones, complaining about the surge pricing. I was saying my goodbyes when I saw Caleb standing by the door, phone in hand, his brow furrowed in frustration. "Everything okay?" I asked, my voice barely a squeak. He looked up, and for a second, his captain of the world smile was gone, replaced by a look of genuine annoyance. Not really. My ride, Mark, had to leave early. His kid got sick. And every car service is either an hour wait or costs a fortune. I live all the way across town, he sighed, running a hand through his damp hair. Looks like I'm sleeping on a bench in the bowling alley tonight. He was joking, of course, but there was an edge of real weariness in his voice. And in that moment, a reckless, insane impulse took over my carefully ordered brain. The archivist in me, the one who always followed the rules and never touched the displays, was suddenly shoved aside by a braver, stupider version of myself. I started, my heart hammering against my ribs. I only live a few blocks from here. You could crash at my place if you want, to wait out the storm. Or, for the night. The words tumbled out of me, clumsy and uncoordinated, like one of my bowling attempts. I immediately braced for the polite refusal, the awkward laugh, the thanks, but I'm good. But Caleb just looked at me. He had these incredibly expressive brown eyes, and right then, they were wide with something that looked like surprise, and then relief. A slow smile spread across his face, the real one, the one that lit up everything. Really, he asked. You do that? Lucas, man, that would be amazing. You'd be saving my life. And just like that, the predictable loop of my life was broken. I had invited the sun into my quiet, little library, and I had no idea if I was about to get a nice, warm glow or be burned to a crisp. All I knew was that Caleb was following me out the door, and the pounding in my chest had nothing to do with the thunder overhead. The walk to my apartment was a mad dash through a world that had turned to water. The wind whipped the rain into our faces, and we were soaked through in seconds. We ran, laughing like kids, dodging puddles that had become small lakes. By the time I fumbled with my keys and got the door open, we were both dripping and breathless, standing in the entryway of my quiet, orderly world. The contrast was immediate. Outside, the storm raged, a chaotic symphony of wind and water. Inside, there was only the soft glow of my reading lamp, the scent of old books and lavender, and the gentle tick of a clock on the wall. Caleb stood there, water pooling at his feet, looking around as if he'd just stepped into another dimension. His presence felt huge in my small living room, vibrant and alive. Wow, he said, his voice softer than I was used to hearing it. This is really nice, Lucas. It's so calm. Thanks. I managed, trying to regain some semblance of composure. It's my fortress of solitude. The joke fell flat, but he smiled anyway. Here, let me get you a towel. And some dry clothes. I gave him the spare sweatpants and a t-shirt I kept for lazy weekends. While he changed in the bathroom, I frantically tidied up, plumping cushions that were already plump, straightening a stack of books that was perfectly straight. I was buzzing with a nervous energy that was both terrifying and thrilling. Caleb, my secret, untouchable crush, was in my bathroom, wearing my clothes. When he came out, my brain stalled for a solid 5 seconds. The t-shirt was a little tight across his chest, and the sweatpants hung low on his hips. His hair was towel-dried and sticking up in a dozen different directions. He looked younger, softer, stripped of the bowling alley swagger. He looked approachable. A perfect fit, he said, striking a mock model pose that made me let out a surprised laugh. The sound echoed in the quiet room, and the tension I was holding in my shoulders eased just a little. We stood there for a moment in an awkward silence, the only sounds being the rain against the window and the hum of my refrigerator. So, he said, gesturing around the room. You're a big reader, huh? My bookshelves lined an entire wall, packed 2 rows deep in some places. It was the most personal thing about me, a map of my mind and my heart laid bare for anyone to see. You could say that, I replied, my voice betraying my nervousness. It's part of the job. He didn't just glance at the titles. He actually walked over and read them, his head tilted. He ran a finger along the spines of a collection of poetry. Walt Whitman, he murmured, more to himself than to me. He turned back, his expression curious. I had to read him in college. I never really got it, But the way my professor talked about him, it was like he was talking about magic. It was such an unexpected thing for him to say. I had pegged him as a guy who read sports magazines, not someone who pondered the magic of 19th century poetry. I think it is a kind of magic, I found myself saying, the words coming more easily now. Taking these big, messy human feelings and wrestling them into a few perfect lines. It's structure for chaos. Caleb looked at me, really looked at me, and I felt a strange shift in the air between us. It was like he was seeing me for the first time, not just as the quiet guy on the team who always missed the 7-pin, but as a person. Structure for chaos, he repeated slowly. I like that. I feel like that's my whole life. And just like that, he opened up. We sat on my worn-out sofa, a safe distance between us, and he talked. He talked about the pressure of being the oldest son, the expectation for him to take over his dad's construction business when all he really wanted to do was coach a high school sports team. He talked about how being the captain of everything, from the bowling team to his family, felt heavy sometimes. He wasn't complaining. He was just sharing. He had this hidden vulnerability I never would have guessed at. The confident, charismatic Caleb was a true part of him. But there was this other layer, a thoughtful, slightly burdened young man who just wanted to make everyone happy. The more he talked, the more the impossible distance between us seemed to shrink. He wasn't a marble statue to be admired from afar. He was a person, full of contradictions and worries, just like me. At one point, I got up to make us some tea. As I handed him a mug, his fingers brushed against mine. It was nothing, a fleeting, accidental touch, but it sent a jolt straight through me, electric and warm. I pulled my hand back as if I'd been burned, my cheeks flushing hot. I was sure he'd noticed, sure he'd think I was a complete weirdo, but when I dared to look at him, he was just smiling down into his mug, a small, gentle smile. We talked for hours. The storm outside eventually softened into a steady, rhythmic drumming against the glass, a peaceful soundtrack to our conversation. We discovered a shared, dorky love for old monster movies and argued playfully about whether Godzilla or King Kong would win in a fight. I found myself laughing, really laughing, not the quiet, polite chuckle I usually managed, but a deep, genuine laugh that came from my stomach. I felt more like myself in those few hours with Caleb than I had in years. Eventually, a huge yawn cracked Caleb's face, and he stretched his arms over his head, the hem of my t-shirt riding up to show a tantalizing strip of skin. "Man, I'm exhausted," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "This has been really nice, Lucas. Thanks again for this." "Of course," I said, my own exhaustion suddenly hitting me. The adrenaline of the evening was wearing off, replaced by a warm, sleepy contentment. "I'll, get you some blankets for the couch." I pulled the spare duvet and a pillow from the hall closet. My couch was comfortable enough, but it looked small now, with Caleb's long frame in mind. I arranged the bedding, trying to make it look as inviting as possible, my hands feeling clumsy and overly large. My mind was a whirlwind. He was going to sleep here, in my living room, 10 feet away from my bed. He was sitting on the edge of the coffee table, watching me with an unreadable expression. The air had gone quiet again, but this time it was different. It wasn't an awkward silence. It was a charged one. It was thick with all the things we hadn't said, with the energy that had been building between us all night. The room felt small, intimate. "There," I said, patting the pillow. "Should be comfortable enough, I think." Caleb didn't move. He just kept looking at me, his brown eyes searching my face. "You know," he said, his voice low and a little hesitant, "I'm a really restless sleeper. Pretty sure I'd just roll right off that thing and crack my head open." He gave a small, nervous laugh. My heart did a painful little flip-flop. "Oh, well, it's wider than it looks," I offered weakly, my brain scrambling for a solution. Did he want me to offer him my bed? Should I take the couch? The social etiquette for your secret crush unexpectedly sleeping over was not something they covered in library science courses. He stood up and took a slow step towards me. We were only a few feet apart now. The air crackled. He looked down at the floor for a second, then met my eyes again. His gaze was intense, questioning. "Hey, Lucas," he started, his voice barely a whisper. "You got a spare room?" I was completely confused. The question made no sense. "No," I said, shaking my head. It's just the one bedroom. Just this and my room." A flicker of something. Was it disappointment? Or maybe resolve? Crossed his face. He took another step, closing the remaining distance between us. He was so close I could feel the warmth radiating from him. He lifted a hand, not to touch me, but to gesture vaguely towards the center of my torso. My own t-shirt suddenly felt thin and useless. "What about that one?" he asked, his voice so soft it was almost swallowed by the sound of the rain. My mind went completely blank. I followed his gesture, looking down at my own chest, as if it were a foreign object. I looked back up at him. My expression must have been one of pure, unadulterated bewilderment. He offered a shaky, hopeful smile. "Looks big enough for one," he clarified. "The spare room. Your chest. Looks comfortable." And the world stopped. It just stopped. The rain, the clock, the blood in my veins. Every coherent thought fled my mind, replaced by a deafening roar of static. He wasn't asking for my bed. He was asking for me. He was asking to sleep on my chest. It was the most audacious, terrifying, and unbelievably intimate thing anyone had ever said to me. It was a question, a confession, and a proposition all rolled into one absurd, beautiful sentence. I couldn't speak. I could only stare at him, my heart trying to beat its way out of my ribcage. This had to be a dream. Or a joke. A very, very cruel joke. But the look in his eyes wasn't joking. It was vulnerable. It was nervous. It was hopeful. He was holding his breath, waiting for my answer, and I realized in that moment that he was just as scared as I was. He had laid his cards on the table, and now it was my turn to play. My voice, when I finally found it, was a croak. "Okay," I whispered. Just that one word. The relief that washed over his face was so profound it almost buckled his knees. The hopeful smile turned into a real one, wide and brilliant. He didn't say anything else. He just nodded, a silent confirmation of this new, terrifying, wonderful agreement we had just made. We moved towards my bedroom in a sort of daze. I don't remember turning off the living room light or pulling back the covers on my bed. It all felt unreal, like I was watching a movie of someone else's life. I got into bed, my body stiff with a nervous anticipation that was almost painful. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, my heart a wild drum against my ribs. Caleb hesitated for a moment at the side of the bed, then he slid in beside me. The mattress dipped with his weight. He turned onto his side, propping himself up on an elbow to look at me. In the dim light filtering in from the street, his eyes were dark pools of sincerity. He didn't make a move. He was giving me an out, a final chance to change my mind. I didn't want to change my mind. I gave him the smallest of nods. Slowly, carefully, as if he were handling a priceless, fragile artifact, he lowered himself down. He rested his head on my chest, right over my heart, which was now threatening to explode. He shifted once, twice, getting comfortable, his arm draped loosely over my stomach. His hair was soft against my chin. I could feel the warmth of his breath through my t-shirt, a steady, rhythmic puff of air that synced up with my own chaotic breathing. For the first 10 minutes, I don't think I moved a single muscle. I was frozen, overwhelmed by the sheer sensory input of it all. The solid, comforting weight of him. The subtle scent of my laundry detergent mixed with his own unique smell. The sound of his breathing, so close and so real. This man, this person I had admired from such a great distance, was here. He was real, and he was trusting me with his vulnerability in the most profound way. My anxiety began to slowly melt away, replaced by a feeling I couldn't quite name. It was a profound sense of peace, a feeling of rightness. Tentatively, I lifted my hand and rested it on his back. I felt him relax under my touch, a small sigh escaping his lips. My fingers curled into the soft cotton of the shirt, my shirt, and I finally allowed myself to breathe. I have no idea when we fell asleep. I just remember lying there in the dark, listening to the rain and the sound of Caleb's steady breathing, my hand rising and falling with the gentle rhythm. I felt like I was the guardian of something precious. For the first time in a very long time, my quiet little apartment didn't feel empty. It felt full. It felt like home. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that nothing would ever be the same again. The morning came too soon. I woke to the pale gray light of a post-storm dawn filtering through my blinds. For a disorienting moment, I couldn't figure out the source of the warmth and weight on my chest. Then it all came rushing back. The storm, the conversation, Caleb. I looked down. He was still there, fast asleep, his face peaceful and unguarded. One of his legs was tangled with mine under the duvet. My arm was still draped over his back. A wave of panic, cold and sharp, cut through the sleepy warmth. What now? What were we now? What did this mean? The intimacy of the night felt fragile in the harsh light of day. Was he going to wake up and regret it? Was he going to laugh it off as some weird, tired thing he did? My mind, my specialty, kicked into overdrive, cataloging every possible negative outcome. He stirred, a low mumble escaping his lips. His eyes fluttered open. He blinked a few times, getting his bearings. He looked up at my face, and for a split second, I saw confusion in his eyes. My heart sank. But then, recognition dawned, and his expression softened into a small, shy smile. He didn't pull away. He just looked at me. "Morning," he whispered, his voice thick with sleep. "Morning," I managed to reply, my own voice hoarse. And then the awkwardness crashed down on us. It was a physical presence in the room. He slowly, gently, lifted his head from my chest and sat up, rubbing the back of his neck. I sat up too, pulling the covers up to my chin like a protective barrier. We avoided each other's eyes. The silent, easy comfort of the night had evaporated, replaced by a humming, unspoken tension. I should get going," he said, swinging his legs out of bed. "Thanks again for everything." The word everything hung in the air between us, heavy with meaning. "No problem," I said, my voice sounding unnaturally high. "Do you want some coffee? Or breakfast?" The offer was automatic, a polite script for a normal morning after, but nothing about this felt normal. He hesitated. "I'd love to, but I really need to get home. My dad's probably wondering where I am." It was a plausible excuse, but it felt like an excuse nonetheless. He quickly gathered his damp clothes from the night before and disappeared into the bathroom. I made coffee anyway, just to have something to do with my hands. The smell filled the apartment, but it didn't feel comforting. It felt like I was playing house in a life that wasn't mine. When Caleb came out, dressed back in his own clothes, the dynamic had shifted completely. He was the team captain again, and I was the quiet guy from the league. The spell was broken. He drank the coffee I offered him standing up in the kitchen, taking quick, businesslike sips. We made small talk about the weather, about the damage the storm might have done. It was excruciating. Every word felt forced, every glance was fleeting. He thanked me again, a little too formally, and then he was at the door. "I'll, see you at practice on Thursday?" he asked, his hand on the doorknob. "Yeah, see you Thursday," I replied, trying to sound casual. And then he was gone. The door clicked shut, and my apartment was quiet again. But it wasn't the peaceful quiet I was used to. It was a loud, deafening silence, filled with the ghost of his presence and a million unanswered questions. I leaned against the door, the lukewarm mug of coffee still in my hand, and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding all morning. The next 2 days were a special kind of torture. My mind became a courtroom where I was both prosecutor and defense attorney, putting the entire night on trial. Exhibit A, the way he looked at my poetry books. Exhibit B, the accidental brush of our hands. Exhibit C, the absurd, impossible request to use my chest as a spare room. I replayed every conversation, analyzed every glance, dissected every word. Was he just being friendly? Was he just a tactile person? Maybe he was drunker than I thought. The hope that had bloomed in my chest during the night was now at war with a lifetime of cautious self-protection. Hope argued that it meant something, that it was the beginning of something wonderful. Fear argued that I had misread everything, that I was a fool, and that I had made things unbearably awkward with the one person whose opinion I secretly cared about most. I considered skipping practice on Thursday. I could feign a cold, a sudden work emergency, anything to avoid the potential humiliation. But I knew that would be cowardly. And besides, not knowing was worse than a potential rejection. I had to face him. I had to see how he acted, what the vibe was. I needed data. My inner archivist demanded it. So, on Thursday, I walked into the bowling alley with my stomach in a knot of dread. The familiar sounds and smells did nothing to soothe me. I spotted the team gathered at our usual lanes. Caleb was there, laughing with one of the other guys. He looked exactly the same, confident, charming, completely at ease. He hadn't been spending the last 48 hours in a state of existential panic, that was for sure. He saw me. Our eyes met across the room. For a brief, terrifying second, his smile faltered. My heart plummeted. This was it. The awkwardness was real. He was going to ignore me, or just give me a polite, distant nod. But then he excused himself from his conversation and started walking towards me. My feet felt nailed to the floor. "Hey, Lucas," he said when he reached me. His voice was quiet, and he wasn't smiling anymore. He looked nervous as I felt. "Hey," I squeaked back. He glanced over his shoulder at the team, then back at me. "Can we, talk for a minute?" In private, my stomach dropped. This was it. The "let's just pretend that never happened" speech. I nodded numbly and followed him down a short hallway that led to the restrooms and a storage closet. The noise of the alley faded behind us, replaced by the low hum of a vending machine. He stopped and turned to face me, leaning against the wall. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stared at his own shoes, scuffing one of them against the linoleum floor. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. "So," he began, his voice barely audible. "About the other night." He finally looked up at me, and what I saw in his eyes wasn't pity or amusement. It was fear. The same fear I had been feeling. "Look, I'm sorry if I made things weird." My heart ached. "It's okay," I said, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. "Don't worry about it." "No," he said, shaking his head firmly. "It's not okay. It's not okay because I wasn't just tired, Lucas. And I wasn't drunk." I knew exactly what I was doing. He took a deep breath, and the words came out in a rush. "I've liked you for months. I had no idea how to talk to you. You're always so quiet, and you have this whole smart, self-contained thing going on. I figured you were way out of my league, or just not interested." I stared at him, dumbfounded. The world tilted on its axis. He liked me. He thought I was out of his league. It was the most wonderfully ludicrous thing I had ever heard. He misinterpreted my shocked silence as rejection. A pained look crossed his face. "The storm was a perfect, stupid excuse," he continued, rambling now. "And then we were at your apartment, and you were so kind, and we were actually talking, and I panicked. Asking to sleep on your chest was the dumbest, clumsiest thing I've ever done in my life. I was just so desperate to be close to you, and I was terrified you'd say no, or worse, laugh at me. I'm so sorry." He finally ran out of steam, looking at me with wide, vulnerable eyes, bracing himself for the verdict. And in that moment, all my fear, all my anxiety, just dissolved. It was replaced by a wave of affection so powerful it almost knocked me off my feet. He wasn't the confident, unattainable captain. He was just Caleb, a guy who was just as nervous and unsure as I was, who had performed a clumsy, desperate, beautiful act of vulnerability. "You thought I was out of your league?" I asked, a real smile, my first in 2 days, spreading across my face. He blinked, thrown by my question. Yeah? You're an archivist. You read poetry. I knock down pins for a living." I let out a laugh, a real one, full of relief and disbelief. "Caleb, I have had a crush on you since the first day I joined this stupid league. I thought you were the most amazing person I'd ever seen. I also thought you were straighter than the foul line." It was his turn to stare in shock. A slow dawn of understanding spread across his features. "You what?" "I spent the entire night you stayed overconvinced I was dreaming." I confessed, my voice growing stronger with every word. "And I've spent the last 2 days convincing myself I imagined the whole thing because there was no way you could possibly be interested in me." A beat of silence passed between us. Then he started to smile. It was a slow, wondrous thing. "So, you weren't weirded out?" "No," I said, shaking my head. "It was the nicest, weirdest, best thing that's ever happened to me." The smile on his face broke wide open, full of a light that could have powered the entire bowling alley. He pushed himself off the wall and closed the small gap between us. He reached out and gently cupped my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. My skin tingled at his touch. "Good," he whispered, "because I'd really like to do it again. The being close to you part, I mean. Maybe without the life-threatening weather conditions as a catalyst." "I think I'd like that too," I whispered back. And then he leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't clumsy or hesitant. It was a kiss full of all the relief and longing and unspoken things that had been building for months. It was confident and sure, a perfect kiss that tasted faintly of vending machine coffee and the promise of a brand new beginning. It was structure for my chaos. And in that quiet hallway, with the distant crash of pins as our soundtrack, I kissed him back, finally home. The weeks that followed felt like waking up from a long, gray dream into a world of brilliant color. We went on our first real date to a terrible monster movie, where we shared a giant popcorn and I let him rest his head on my shoulder. It turned out he was right. He was a restless movie watcher, constantly shifting, but I didn't mind. His energy was a welcome counterpoint to my stillness. Telling the team was surprisingly anticlimactic. We were holding hands at the bowling alley one night, a small act of bravery on my part, and Mark, the guy whose sick kid had inadvertently started this whole thing, just looked at our joined hands and then back at Caleb. He grinned and said, "Well, it's about time, Captain. Your pining was starting to affect your game, apparently." I was the only person in the entire league who hadn't noticed Caleb watching me. Our lives began to merge in small, wonderful ways. He'd leave a sweatshirt at my apartment. I'd leave a book at his. He introduced me to the chaotic joy of a Sunday football game with his family. I introduced him to the quiet pleasure of a rainy afternoon spent reading in companionable silence. He didn't always get the poetry, and I didn't always get the sports, but we were endlessly fascinated by each other's worlds. One night, months later, we were lying on my couch, tangled up together, watching some old black and white film. The windows were open, letting in the cool night air and the distant sounds of the city. Caleb was in his favorite spot, his head resting comfortably on my chest, his breathing slow and even. It was a position that was no longer charged with the nervous energy of that first night, but was now filled with a deep, easy intimacy. I ran my fingers through his hair, marveling at the simple, profound fact of his presence in my life. He was here. This incredible, kind, funny, and loving man was here, with me. It was a miracle I was still trying to get used to. He shifted slightly, tilting his head back to look up at me, his eyes soft in the flickering light from the television. He smiled that gentle smile of his, the one that always made my heart feel like it was expanding. "You know," he murmured, his voice a low, happy rumble against my ribs. I was thinking. "Oh yeah?" I asked, smiling back down at him. "What about?" He reached up and traced a lazy pattern on my shirt, right over my heart. "This is still the best spare room in town," he said softly. 5 stars. Highly recommend. I laughed, a quiet, happy sound that filled the small space between us. I leaned down and kissed him, a slow, lingering kiss full of gratitude and love. When I pulled back, I rested my forehead against his. It's funny, isn't it? You spend so much of your life building walls to protect yourself, creating a quiet, orderly fortress against the chaos of the world. You think you're safe in there, but you don't realize that true safety isn't about being alone. It's about finding the one person who makes you feel brave enough to finally open the door. It's about letting the storm in, because you might just find that it was never a storm you needed to be saved from, but a person you were meant to save a space for all along.